Before I begin, I want to say that I respect Antybu86 and I agree with the majority of his videos. He always has a respectful tone and seems to be intellectually honest, unlike many YouTubers. I also do not want to seem ungrateful for the shout-out he gave me in his video about MTC Strength's plagiarism, so thank you again for that, Antybu. So, this is my second response to Antybu86's two-part video critique of certain vegan arguments which he has hitherto found unconvincing. As was the case in Antybu's second video, my second video will address the moral issues directly involving our treatment of animals and Antybu's analysis of those issues.
The best presentation of this argument which I've heard came from Dr. Shelley Keegan in a debate with the famous Christian apologist Dr. William Lane Craig.
What can the naturalists say in the struggle for survival of the fittest? How is there any kind of ethic toward behavior toward animals?
My view wasn't survival of the fittest. My view was that what morality boils down to is don't harm and do help. And now the question is, can creatures like chickens and cows be harmed? And the answer is, of course they can. Consequently, I think it's immoral to harm them.
So if we agree with Dr. Keegan that morality boils down to avoiding harm, then we should restate his question. Can animals be harmed? And on first reaction, we might all answer yes. But is this harm we're talking about superficial? That is to say, are we just destroying what amounts to mindless biological machines? Or are we destroying something of great value? Well, before we can answer this question, we have to determine what it is that we perceive as valuable. And luckily, Dr. Keegan addressed this earlier in the same debate.
I'm still not clear as to why these beings suddenly achieve intrinsic moral worth in virtue of having these complex nervous systems that enables them to have self-reflection and so forth.
If you put it as complex nervous systems, it sounds pretty deflationary.
Right.
What's so special about having a complex nervous system? But of course, that complex nervous system allows you to do calculus. It allows you to do astrophysics. It allows you to write poetry. It allows you to fall in love. Put under that description, you ask, what's so special about humans from a naturalistic perspective? I'm at a loss to know how to answer that question. If you don't see why we'd be special and different from everything else in creation, that because we can do poetry, we can write a novel, we can think philosophical thoughts, we can do calculus, and we can think about the morality of our behavior, I don't know what kind of answer could possibly satisfy you at that point.
And it turns out that most animals don't have these same capacities which Dr. Keegan lists, which would mean that they don't require moral consideration. However, instead of looking at things such as the ability to do math and write poetry, it might be better to focus on something like intelligence, which gives rise to these abilities, as well as features I consider to be very important, consciousness and self-awareness.
As far as I can gather, Antybu seems to think that harm is equivalent to destroying something valuable, since he makes it clear that until we know what we value, we cannot know whether we are harming animals. He ultimately decides that intelligence is the thing that he values. In Antybu's view, intelligence is the thing which he considers the most important in determining a being's moral worth. As a utilitarian, I think this is the wrong metric. In the famous words of Jeremy Bentham, quote, "The day may come when the rest of the animal creation may acquire those rights which never could have been withholden from them but by the hand of tyranny." The French have already discovered that the blackness of skin is no reason why a human being should be abandoned without redress to the caprice of a tormentor. It may come one day to be recognized that the number of legs, the velocity of skin, or the termination of the os sacrum are reasons equally insufficient for abandoning a sensitive being to the same fate. What else is it that should trace the insuperable line? Is it the faculty of reason, or perhaps the faculty for discourse? The question is not, can they reason, nor can they talk, but can they suffer, end quote. The amount of suffering a being endures is tied in with its intelligence, of course. An intelligent creature can foresee its life ending to a greater extent, feel anger if its life is going to be cut short, etc., and this can increase the amount of suffering that a being feels over what it otherwise would have felt had it been unintelligent. So, luckily for our purposes, the intelligence of a creature correlates pretty well with the amount of suffering it is capable of. This enables us to accept Antybu's notion of a sliding scale of moral consideration.
And by using intelligence as our criteria, it means that there's no cutoff point. There's no line needed to separate organisms which deserve moral consideration from those which don't. Instead, it's a sliding scale where humans deserve the most consideration, followed by creatures of relatively high intelligence, and then going all the way down to organisms with no amount of intelligence. And I already hear the vegans shouting an objection. Well, that must mean you think that Nobel laureates deserve more moral consideration than somebody who is, for example, autistic. The problem is that this objection takes a very simplistic view of intelligence and ignores things like kinesthetic intelligence, artistic intelligence, and emotional intelligence. And when you take these forms of intelligence into consideration, even the most intellectually impaired of our species falls within the same bounds of intelligence as everybody else, especially in comparison to other species.
The problem with this is that Howard Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences is tremendously controversial. I know there are many people who think Wikipedia is unreliable, but the criticisms of the theory of multiple intelligences are from scholarly sources in this case. According to Wikipedia, many of Gardner's intelligences actually correlate with general intelligence, supporting the idea of a single dominant type of intelligence, end quote. And quoting from a critical review of the evidence for multiple intelligences, quote, "To date, there have been no published studies that offer evidence of the validity of the multiple intelligences." In 2004, Sternberg and Grigorenko stated that there were no validating studies for multiple intelligences, and in 2004, Gardner asserted that he would be, quote, "delighted were such evidence to accrue," and he admitted that, quote, "multiple intelligence theory has few enthusiasts among psychometricians or others of a traditional psychological background," end quote, because they require, quote, "psychometric or experimental evidence that allows one to prove the existence of the several intelligences," end quote. Since the multiple intelligences correlate with the measure of general intelligence, it would be quite likely that a Nobel Prize winner would, on all accounts, be more intelligent than someone with autism or Down syndrome. I believe that if intelligence does correlate with suffering, a Nobel Prize winner would deserve a little more moral consideration than someone with autism, because they are probably more capable of suffering. This does not mean that they have happier lives, obviously, only that they suffer a little less than a Nobel Prize winner would in similar scenarios.
So let's get back to Dr. Keegan's question. Can animals be harmed? Well, if we use this sort of sliding scale, the answer is still yes. However, it also means that we can't do as much harm to animals which don't show complex emotion, don't develop any meaningful interpersonal relationships, don't have any real goals, and can't even begin to understand concepts like life and death. So to use these animals for the purpose of our survival would be justified, but to needlessly torture them would be wrong.
This is a really bizarre non sequitur. Let's demonstrate this with an example. We can say with some confidence that a human newborn is less intelligent than some of the animals that are consumed by meat eaters, especially pigs, and is therefore less capable of suffering than those animals. We can conclude that a newborn is lower on the scale of moral consideration than a pig. Since we can disregard the theory of multiple intelligences, Antybu's logic now has the following implication. Since newborns are lower on the scale of moral consideration, using them for our purposes and killing them in the process is justified unless we torture them. Now, I'm not using this example so I can polemically label Antybu a baby killer or someone who disregards the interests of infants. I know he isn't. I just want to use this example to show the absurdity of the claim that a being can be within the sphere of moral consideration, yet still used for one's relatively minor benefit. Even if a being is unintelligent and lacks awareness, its suffering will, in most cases, outweigh the pleasure that is derived from eating its flesh. And anyway, animals are tortured on factory farms. Even if you support the killing of animals for their meat when they suffer only very little, it does not mean you should be eating meat as it is currently manufactured. Branding, animals living in their own feces, pigs which literally never go outside, get no stimulation, and in the majority of cases cannot move more than a few inches, chickens who live in ammonia-filled rooms, the ammonia comes from their own feces, by the way, have their beaks clipped off. If they lay eggs, chickens literally cannot move at all for most of their life, and are routinely starved so that they start laying eggs again. I could go on, but it won't. Vegans often use these descriptions to shock meat eaters, but if you present this information without any argumentation or theoretical support, I think it does more harm than good. People do not want pictures of dying animals shoved in their faces, and if it is a vegan who does the shoving, it just makes people dislike vegans even more. If you wish to know more about the meat industry, you can watch the oft-mentioned Meat Your Meat video, which I will link to in the sidebar. Although I believe people should be aware of the suffering that they are causing, I warn you, it is gruesome and difficult to watch, so if you don't feel up to it, that's okay. I know that I will hear the objection that this is a video by PETA, an organization which will probably be biased, but I've read the majority of the information in that video from more reliable sources. Before I end this video, I want to recommend a book that has profoundly influenced how I think about these issues. The book is the classic Animal Liberation by Peter Singer. Singer argues with a calm lucidity and rationality which is alien to most meat-eaters' conceptions of how vegans and vegetarians think. Even though I do not like Singer's meta-ethics, I think this book is a must-read. Even if you find my argument unconvincing, I think you will find his much more so. So, why not try being a vegetarian?